So here we are and live on the YouTube. Wonderful. Dear guests, please turn on your cameras. So, ladies and gentlemen all over the world, as usual, good morning, afternoon, or evening, or night, depends on where you are. This is Claudio speaking, and this is the iCore webinar number 8. And this time, we'll be talking about extended reality in rehabilitation. Do virtual skills transfer to real skills? To this aim, I remind all our viewers on the YouTube that you can send comments and questions live style during the webinars. So all the time, there's no problem. I will forward your questions to our guests. Today's program is rich, so we have 4 prominent guests. Dr. Ana Lucia Faria, Dr. Raoul Bongers, Dr. Philippe Archambault, and Dr. Matthew Dyson. So I'm now going to quickly introduce all of them in a row, and then we will start 4 short talks. I'm going to give you 12 minutes each, after which we will open the floor, and you will be bombarded by questions by myself, by yourselves, or by our guests on the YouTube. So, about our guests, Dr. Ana Lucia Faria is health and clinical psychologist with a PhD in psychology from the University of Coimbra, Portugal. Her doctoral research led to the creation of a novel cognitive rehabilitation personalization framework offering objective guidelines that informed the development of 3 innovative tools. They're called RehaTask, RehaCity, and Task Generator. And these tools were clinically validated with stroke patients from the Madeira Health Service. Ana Lucia Faria is currently an invited assistant professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Madeira, where she also serves as director of the master's program in clinical health and well-being psychology. Ana is an integrated researcher at the Nova Laboratory for Informatics and Computer Science and the psychology lead at the Neuro Rehab Lab. She supervises multidisciplinary students' projects spanning clinical and health psychology, neuropsychology, informatics engineering, and interactive media design from both Madeira and Coimbra universities. I am particularly proud that we could have Dr. Faria with us, as she is a psychologist, whereas all others, we are all engineers, I guess. I'm afraid we are, right? Never mind that. Our second speaker, Dr. Raoul Bongers, an old dear friend of mine, by the way. He works at the Department of Human Movement Sciences of the University Medical Center in Groningen, at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. As usual, sorry for my pronunciation, but your language is a mystery to me. Raoul focuses on action perception learning and motor learning from an ecological dynamical perspective. In particular, he focuses on the emergence of coordinative structures in joint angles and muscles during learning, motor learning. And he then translates this knowledge on learning to the rehabilitation practice, and particularly the rehabilitation training of upper limb prosthetics. Our third speaker, Dr. Philippe Archambault, after obtaining a PhD in neurosciences from the Université de Montréal in Canada, he did a postdoctoral internship in neurophysiology at Roma La Sapienza, the main university in Rome, Italy. Presently, he is full professor at the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill University. He's also a researcher and co-scientific director of the Center of Interdisciplinary Research in Rehabilitation, Montreal, Canada, once again. He's particularly interested in developing and evaluating rehabilitation technologies. More specifically, his research focuses on the use of robotics and virtual reality for the rehabilitation of patients who have suffered a stroke. He also conducts research on the development and evaluation of simulators for the training of persons requiring mobility devices, such as wheelchairs and scooters. And last but absolutely not least, Dr. Matthew Dyson, University of Newcastle, is a lecturer at this university in the School of Engineering. His academic background is in real-time processing of biomedical data, and his current research area is upper limb prosthetics. While a research associate, Matthew led an NIHR project to develop a digital platform for teaching children how to use prosthesis, and is currently exploring how techniques from motor learning can be used to enhance upper limb rehabilitation at home. I hope this gives us a great perspective, so without much further ado, I'd give the stage to our first speaker, Dr. Ana Lucia Faria.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's very nice to be here, and I'm very used to working with engineers, occupational therapists, designers. So I work in an multidisciplinary team, and this work that I'm going to show here is also a result of this multidisciplinary work. So I started working in neuropsychological rehabilitation through virtual reality 10 years ago. Now XR is a more inclusive term. The motivation for working in this field came from the fact that I was working in clinical practice with acquired brain injury patients, with dementia patients, and traditional cognitive interventions were often offering lack of real life relevance.
And Anna, just in case we're not seeing your presentation.
You're not?
You are presenting.
Sorry. Yes, I am. Sorry. As I said, I'm in a different computer.
Your computer.
Yes.
And this is the demo effect. It was working a few minutes ago.
It was, yes, and now I think again. Now it's okay.
Yes. We're seeing your PowerPoint screen rather than the presentation, and that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the need for this kind of working with virtual reality for neuropsychological practice came from the fact that my experience was with the traditional paper and pencil tools or computerized tasks with challenges that had no any connections to real life demands in executive function, memory, social behavior, etc. Also, these kind of tasks are very demotivating. People would take them home and would miss doing it because of their lack of engagement and also relevance for their daily lives. Still today, most assessment and rehabilitation approaches are based on paper and pencil activities that are theoretically valid. Wechsler memory scale, Wechsler adult intelligence scale, trail-making test A and B are widely used tests all over the world, and these are mainly today are mainly presented through paper and pencil tasks. They use static stimuli, which can be demotivating and lack ecological validity. Ecological validity brings us to the real world versus the lab dilemma, which is not new. In 82, Neisser argued that cognitive psychology experiments were conducted in artificial settings and deployed measures with no counterparts in everyday life. In the other perspective, in 89, Banerjee and Crowder advocated that the ecological approaches lacked the internal validity and the experimental control. And since then, we search for a balance between everyday experiments in the lab and naturalistic observations. Virtual reality and its associated technologies came as a solution to this dilemma, since it allows the precise presentation and control of dynamic stimuli, providing ecologically valid experiences that combine the control and rigor of laboratory measures with simulations that depict real-life situations, leading to a balance between naturalistic observation and the need to control key variables. XR, meaning the inclusion of eye tracking and augmented reality, came to bring even higher ecological validity, precise data capture, and literature has been showing that they improve generalization to real life better than paper and pencil or computerized tasks. So I performed a review that was published in 2023 about simulations of daily livings for assessment and rehabilitation of acquired brain injury. And we looked for the virtual environments using for assessment and rehabilitation of acquired brain injury that used, we wanted to know which technologies were used, how these were being clinical validated, and their impact on ABI assessment and rehabilitation. Okay, we have searched 3 digital database, 20 years of publishing, and we wanted to know if they involved individuals from any age with stroke or TBI and simulated environments of the real world or ADLs. Overall, we've considered 71 studies, and they mostly were simulations of kitchens, supermarkets, shopping malls, streets, cities, and other everyday life scenarios. These scenarios were mostly presented in computer screens, mobile phone, head-mounted displays, and wall projections, and patients interact with them primarily via keyboard, mouse, Kinect, joypad, or joystick. Numerous studies have been carried out, but they're mostly case studies or feasibility studies with few patients, and we found very few randomized controlled trials. Evidence still modest, and further research is needed with more extensive samples. And this is also a reason that cognitive rehabilitation remains excluded from the Cochrane reviews. The data is very scarce. Also, we need major uniformity and ecological validity of the neuropsychological tests that are used to strengthen conclusions between studies. Most neuropsychological measures are paper and pencil based and also lack ecological validity, which means they don't fully capture the gains, the clinical impact of neuropsychological interventions using extended reality. These are the most used tests, but there are many more. There's a big heterogeneity of measures being used from different research teams in different countries. Most targeted domain were executive functions, attention, memory, motor, general cognition, and as I said, they're mainly presented through computer screen, mouse, VR glasses, keyboard, and joystick we used for interaction. I will talk with a bit of more detail of one of my works, the RIA City, which is a virtual simulations where different cognitive functions are integrated in performance of daily routines. RIA City was developing, trying to depart from the paradigm of paper and pencil tasks, which are theoretically validated. So we have this tool also enables a personalization of the cognitive training according to the cognitive profile of the patient. In this case, we use the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Screening Tool to personalize the training, the demands of the session. In the supermarket, we have like the cancellation problems resolution that you could find in paper and pencil. So you have agreed with the targets and distractors that patients can select. We also have problem resolution here with the calculations. We have the representation of the arm for the stroke hemiparetic patients, for them to in the sense of the activation of the mirror neurons, for them to imagine this arm as being theirs. We have the navigation in the streets, the numeric sequences in the bank to access the paying of the bills. Also have a cancellation task in the pharmacy with the same supermarket paradigm of targets and distractors. We have action sequencing at home. At home, there's the living room, the kitchen, and the toilet. So the people can perform action sequencing of daily routines. In the kiosk, okay, we have also this interaction because of avoiding clicks. I will show you the setup after. So in the kiosk, we have memory of stories where people have a text to read and then they have questions about it, see if they were memorized the text. Also in the fashion store, we have a categorization tasks. Okay. and in the park, a game with association of pairs of images that you could also find in paper and pencil tasks. So we compared the RIA-CT, we performed an intervention with the RIA-CT, comparing with an active control group. Sorry, there's a mistake here. It's an active control group who performed 12 sessions with paper and pencil tasks, and RIA-CT performed 12 sessions with cognitive and motor training sessions, in the sense they were using the paretic arm during 12 sessions of 30 minutes. We performed the baseline and the post-intervention cognitive and functional assessment, and the 2 months follow-up cognitive and functional assessment. So I must say that both these interventions were equivalent, being that this is a task generator, a web-based application to generate cognitive training tasks, and it has the same personalization paradigm. So it uses the Montreal Cognitive Assessment cognitive profile to personalize the training. So they were the most equivalent possible in our perspective. So this was the RIA-CT setup that leads us to say there was a cognitive and motor intervention, because the patients used their paretic arm to interact with the system, although we didn't look of the data of if there was an improvement in the range of movement. So RIA-CT, in a total of 21 metrics, improved in 7 of them, and the paper and pencil in 5. Between groups, RIA-CT was also superior, and the most important result is this tool, PRECIS, who assesses the impact of cognitive deficits in daily life. So this tool asks the patients about their difficulties in their daily life caused by cognitive deficits, and here there's a significant reduction of this impact, which is meaningful, and it leads us to conclude that there was a better transfer of the trainings for the real life of the patients. Okay, also in the intervention, RIA-CT offered the more intensive training, leading to more task repetitions and higher difficulty adaptation progression, which we believe that can be translated in more cognitive improvement. So in this RIA-CT, there's points, there's also a more engaging, and people could relate the tasks with their daily life, since we were using Portuguese brands in the environment. We are now giving further steps in RIA-CT to improve its clinical impact. We are thinking that it's better to allow patients who have a simulation have less control over the tasks, less guided tasks. We are working to make it more accessible through head-mounted display, eye tracking interaction, so avatars for social interaction, including avatars for social interaction. And also we are trying to be more concerned with real life challenges. One of them, main target for us now is social cognition, a critical predictor of social competence. Acquired brain injury patients, which is the clinical group we're working more with frequently, especially the traumatic brain injuries, frequently have disruption in social cognition, problem resolution theory of mind, which means interpreting other emotions, knowing what are correct and incorrect behaviors, social behaviors. And this is not a priority concern when people go to clinical services. But social maladjustments can have a real impact in patients' daily lives, in their familiar lives, social networks, being able to find a job and keep that job. So for this reason also the latest edition of the DACM introduced social cognition as one of the 6 core components of neurocognitive function. So we are working towards it.
Anna, your time is up. You should
Okay.
please.
I just have these two slides to say that and then we went again for a paper and pencil tasks about social cognition, and we with scenarios of their lives where we are departing from the paper and pencil paradigms of scenarios of correct or incorrect behaviors, and transpose them for the VR environments for the patients to see it in the first person perspective or interact in the virtual environment as one of the agents. In these situations, we see someone smoking in a non-allowed area. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Muito obrigado. And so it seems to me that your message is we're getting to more realism in XR, and this seems to make things better. Dr. Bongers, what is your take on that? The stage is yours. Your microphone is mute.
All right, good. Thank you,
Perfect.
Claudia, for the invitation. You can see my slides, I presume?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Well, thanks, Claudio, again. Thank you for the great group, and I really like the different perspectives, the different backgrounds. So my talk is titled Task Specificity Training of Skills and its Implementation in Virtual Reality Application. And you will see in the talk, Claudio, that I'm not an engineer and I have a different background, but this will become clear. Just because of time, let's dive into this immediately. And let's start to discuss how you control actions, because the idea of rehabilitation is to improve movements and so actions. So let's first understand how those are controlled, and perhaps that gives us a lead of how to where we should focus on when rehabilitating movements. Now let's focus on ball catching. Now, so suppose here in yellow there is a hand. And there are two possible ball trajectories, one in sort of pink purple and the other one in kind of blue. And if you think then of a ball that comes down, then you see the movement of the hand, then you can have a kind of a model that sort of predicts the movement of the ball and its landing location, and then it moves the hand to the landing location, what you see here. And this is what we would call predictive control. And important here is that the movement of the hand is actually independent of the trajectory of the ball. You just predict the interception location and you move that into that interception location. Another perspective, I have to move my screen a bit to see better what I do. Yes. Another perspective here is that the ball moves, but you can use specific perceptual information about the landing location. And just to give you an idea, if you think about the lateral ball angle velocity and its ratio with the dilatation angle, it gives you a specification of how far the ball will land next to you. And if you think about this perspective, then the hand trajectory would differ for balls that come, in this case in purple, from an outward angle, from balls that come from an inward angle, as you see what I try to depict here. And this is what I would call a perspective control. And actually, this perspective control mode is confirmed by the literature, where you see here on the horizontal axis the hand trajectory and the different bundles of lines reflect the hand trajectories to different ball arrival positions. And you see that the color coding of the lines that differs for different ball departure positions, actually the different ball trajectories. So it's quite well confirmed in the literature that in the control of actions you use some kind of perspective control. Now, what might that perspective control be? So we showed that we do not compute states of models, states and models of the world and models of the body, but there is some kind of perceptual information that specifies the action to be performed. Basically, what if you think about actions and about explaining actions, you have to find a control law that specifies how information and movement is coupled. And that has been confirmed in several studies. Here is a plot on a figure on how this can work for lateral manual interception. In the middle, a figure of how that can work for catching fly balls, and also how to regulate the grasping movement during a reach to grasp actions. So this idea of perceptual information, how it's coupled to movement, that and in this approach, you actually do not predict where or when an object is interception, but the perceptual information guides you to that location, and it's not clear in advance. Now, if you accept that, then this would apply that a transfer of skills from a rehabilitation, from a virtual training to a actual daily life setting is only possible when the information movement coupling in both situations is the same. And let's first, a first indication that this might be the case, it comes from a study that studied the transfer of perception action coupling in virtual walking to walking and to crawling in real world. So what did these users do? And this is a pretty old study, so there was no picture. So I stole some pictures from the web of current day virtual reality situations. Because in the task, participants walked on a treadmill in a cave, and they walked over the Grand Place in Brussels. And what was done was that the walking speed was kept constant, but the visual speed was adapted in the different conditions. So sometimes it was the visual speed matched your biomechanical walking speed. In one condition it was faster, and in another condition it was slower. Then in the real world condition, you had to walk or crawl to a certain location, and then they looked how far you crawled. And actually what was found that these biomechanical, that the conditions in where the biomechanical you had were faster than the visual speed, that the walking, the distance in the, you trained where the biomechanical speed differed from the visual speed. Then in the post-test, there was a recalibration. So in the training, there was a recalibration of walking with virtual reality, and that transferred to natural walking and crawling. So basically, in the transfer test, there was a difference how far you walked or crawled, depending on your experience, your calibrated experience in the virtual environment. So the idea is that a new information movement coupling has emerged during the training, and that transferred to the natural situation. And that was true for the same tasks, the walking, but also for other tasks that might be controlled by the same information movement coupling, in this case, crawling. So if you think about then the transfer and this task specificity of training, then we show that learning and information movement coupling in virtual reality transfers to actions in the natural world. And this might suggest that for task-specific training in virtual reality, you have to train a specific information movement coupling to have the transfer to specific tasks in ADL. And but if you think about task-specific training in current rehabilitation, then that has this particular connotation. And for instance, in a citation or of Langhorne et al. Says rehabilitation approaches where specific functional tasks are practiced repeatedly. That's what's called a task-specific training and rehabilitation. And two important elements of that is that you reconstruct the task of daily life in the rehabilitation training. So you make sure that the task is sort of exactly the same, and the task should be relevant to the patient. And the focus in this approach is on the goal or the task, and you actually have to use precise mimicking of the task. However, if you think about the study and the information movement coupling, actually, then it should be the information movement coupling that should be the same to promote transfer, and not necessarily the precise mimicking of the task. And this is important because this gives you much more freedom in your rehabilitation training. So we studied this idea for training of hand prosthesis use, and briefly for the people who are not that familiar with this topic. So here you see a prosthesis, a socket, that was the word I was looking for. And in the middle picture, you see in the socket two electrodes, and these electrodes detect EMG, the muscle activation signals, and these muscles, the electrodes are activated when you wear the prosthesis around the stump. And you see these here more technical, where you have the electrodes and that control the activation of a motor in the hand. And here you see EMG signals of hand opening and hand closing signals to open and close the prosthesis hand. That's a rough idea. Now, what we did in this study was and this is this is an older study. You see that at the EMG electrodes, people had to catch balls that fell from the ceiling, and they had to control the hand opening and the hand closing to catch those balls. And you see these small lightnings when the hand opens too far, and that was feedback that we used to give feedback about the information movement coupling that people used. And if they did it correct, they got all kinds of they got points and some flashing. What we showed in this, so what we did actually in this study was we mimicked the ADL task, but it was not exactly the same. And we had feedback on the particular information movement coupling, and particularly on how you control the hand opening with respect to the object that needed to be grasped. And we had several conditions. For instance, we had also a condition where we just mimicked the ADL task. We had a condition where you played a different game, and etc. And what we found was actually only the condition where we had to mimic the ADL task and where the feedback was on the information movement coupling. There we saw that the hand opening, what you see here on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, you see time, the hand opening was scaled to the object size. And this is exactly what you see in natural behavior. And that's actually what you hardly see when prosthesis users pick up an object in daily life. So what we did actually through the feedback and the tasks, we trained participants on the use of a specific information movement coupling, and that was a prerequisite for the transfer from the serious game of the prosthesis. All right, so if you think about promoting the transfer from a virtual reality, an XR environment, or a serious gaming training to ADL, then it is important to establish the information movement coupling in the task. So one should think of the task and what defines that task, and find the control law in that task, and then try to find an information movement coupling in virtual reality that trains that specific task or that element of the task. And if you then think about using XR, you should consider which parts of the task should be similar to train the information movement coupling in ADL task, and what particular type of feedback to use. And that is at least my advice to develop XR training from this conceptual perspective. So I would like you for your attention. The people that worked with me in this topic, Corey van der Sluis, Lutger van Dijk, Aniek Heerschop on the prosthesis part, and Claire Michaels, David Jacobs, and Frank Saal on the information movement coupling, and there's the several funders over the years of our work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Raoul. That was great, and I have a really nasty question for you, which I'll refrain from asking now, so be prepared. And so I'll give the
expect
stage to
otherwise.
our, yeah, sure, you're already excited. I'll give the stage to our next speaker, Dr. Archambault.
Yep, just a second.
That's
Okay,
perfect.
that
Thanks.
worked. Wait, let me go back here. Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation. I'm also not an engineer. I'm an occupational therapist, although I do have an undergrad. Before being an occupational therapist, I did the undergrad in physics, so I'm adjacent, let's say, to engineering. So today I'm going to talk about using VR for the training of wheelchair skills, and just to provide you with a bit of background. So in Canada, we have about, and this is the same in the Western world, about 1% of the population requires a wheelchair or scooter or some kind of mobility aid. And so these are essential for the accomplishment of daily tasks for people who have mobility impairments. And training is essential because it leads to safer use and more efficient use also of these mobility devices. And VR or XR can be used to complement regular training, so providing more time to learn those skills and in a safe environment. But there's, of course, the question is, do the skills learned in these VR environments transfer to the real skills, which is really important, otherwise we'd be wasting our time. So I've been working in my lab with my team on what we call the McGill Wheelchair Simulator. The first version we developed, or one of the first, is for Power Wheelchair. It runs on it's a serious game app running on a Windows PC, controlled through a joystick. And the tasks that were implemented were developed from a co-design process. We actually developed 6 mini games, and we test so that mimic daily life and that were important to users. So this is an example here of a street crossing. There's 3 levels for each game. And so we did a randomized control trial to look at the effects of simulated training. That was done in new wheelchair users and through a home program. So they were training at home for a period of 2 weeks with 22 participants per group. And the control group, they had the same setup, the same joystick, but they had a kart racing video game instead. And so one of the the assessment that we did was the wheelchair skills test. And you can see that both groups improved. This is the control in orange, and the purple is the simulator group. So both groups improved, which was great. And there was also more significant improvement in the simulator group rather than in the control group. There was also improvement in both groups in terms of confidence in their own skills. The wheelchair skills test capacity is basically the number of skills that the people are able to perform safely. There was also, with colleagues, we did a study in children. So there was the MIWI was adapted for children. And in this study, there were 30 children and youth aged between 6 and 18. And the comparison this time was practicing either with the simulator or with a real power wheelchair that they had for 12 weeks at home. And again, if we take on the left-hand side, so both groups, it's organized, both groups improved in terms of, this is a different assessment that's used for children, but they improved in wheelchair skills after the program. There's no difference between the real training and virtual training. But this is the study was done in Israel, and this is the assessment that is used in order to determine if the child is safe to use a wheelchair. So that was done in with a real wheelchair. And some of them could be provided with a chair by the public health service after the wheelchair simulator training. Other projects that we're doing are related to the biomechanics of manual wheelchair propulsion. And this is with a different version of the simulator that was done in our lab. So again, to provide you with a bit of background in terms of wheelchair biomechanics, what happens is that this is a movement that produces a lot of strain, especially in the shoulder and elbow. So lots of torques due to repeated movements. And there are guidelines in order to improve efficiency of wheelchair propulsion and reduce basically the peak torque that is experienced in the shoulder joints during propulsion. And one of them is to improve contact angle. So the contact angle is basically the amplitude of the push. So the angle when the hand first comes into contact with the push rim and when the hand releases the push rim. So that creates an angle. It's called contact angle. So the recommendation is during a push to increase the contact angle so that you decrease peak torque on the joints, and similarly to decrease push frequency. So basically to have longer and smoother pushes. So we designed a low-cost wheelchair simulator. I'll start the video here. So you can see the participants' view on the right side and the movements on the left side. So it's basically a floor-mounted platform with two motors that provide force feedback on the wheels, and then any wheelchair can be mounted on it. And basically the participant can use their own wheelchair as a controller for the environment. And what we designed here is an infinite sidewalk scenario, so you can decide which obstacles people will encounter. So it has basically as a way for people to practice, to build up their strength and endurance while avoiding certain obstacles. So what we did is in our experiment, this was done with healthy participants, and the advantage is that they are naive with respect to wheelchair use. And we added the feedback on some of their biomechanical parameters that can be measured with the simulator. We had a control group who received no feedback. We had two feedback groups. We received feedback about their cadence and contact angle. One with a regular feedback schedule. So for those who are familiar with motor control, this means that they were receiving feedback regularly during the training, and one with a faded feedback schedule. So that means that as they progress, as the number of repetitions progress, they receive feedback less and less frequently, which is supposed to lead to better retention. So this was done over different sessions, and then 2 days after training, they came back for another test where we tested both in the wheelchair and in a real wheelchair. We also tested their biomechanical efficiency in a real wheelchair before we started training. So this is what feedback was. This was the feedback screen. So they had the contact angle in purple that they were doing averaged over the last 10 pushes, and in green was their objective. So they knew they had to either increase or decrease. And we had the same also for similar thing for push frequency. So this was presented at the end of a block. So in terms of the results, so you can see on the right-hand side, so in gray is the control group, and blue is the regular feedback schedule, and orange is the faded feedback. So you can see that the control group in the simulator, there was no change in terms of, this is contact angle, and we had similar results for push frequency. And the two feedback groups improved, but there were no differences between the two feedback schedule. They both improved. And in terms of transfer, so this is their performance in a real wheelchair before training and after. The same in the gray, there was no change before and after. Both feedback groups improved, but again, no differences in terms of feedback schedule. So it was good news that basically they trained in a simulator. We tested before and after. Since they're not wheelchair users, they were not using any wheelchair during training. And there was this was two days after the simulator training was completed. So there was a clear transfer to the real wheelchair biomechanics, but the type of feedback schedule did not influence. It's possible that with a larger sample, we see a little bit of a difference that was not significant between the two groups, but it's possible that with a larger sample, we could have seen something. And then I have another, I see that my time is almost up, but I'm almost done. Another
Still got a
way
couple minutes though.
So,
2 minutes.
All right. Another way of improving the biomechanics is looking at the propulsion pattern. So this is the basically the trajectory of the hand during propulsion. And a lot of people, when they start, they do this arcing pattern where the hand remains in contact with the push rim. But what is actually recommended is to have a semicircular pattern. So when the hand pushes, when you release, you go back low, almost touching the center of the wheel, and come back. And this naturally provides you with a type of push where you will increase contact angle and decrease frequency. So it's more efficient. And so what we did is build a detector and classifier of wheelchair pattern, propulsion pattern through a webcam and a convolutional neural network. So to basically classify semicircular from the other pattern, and this worked really well. And it was integrated in the simulator through a treasure hunt game. Just this is all for, it's one of my PhD students who's completing his PhD thesis, and we did a similar study only with a few participants. So we have here the control who had no feedback. This is in a real wheelchair first, then the training session in the simulator, and then 2 days after so in terms of propulsion pattern, they didn't change. So they stayed at a low ratio of semicircular patterns, whereas the feedback group, and these are individual participants, they improved in the simulator. And when we put them back in a real wheelchair, they maintained this. So they really learned this new type of propulsion pattern for them. So just to conclude that training in a power wheelchair simulator can improve real wheelchair skills in both adults and children. And we can also improve propulsion biomechanics in a manual wheelchair. And this transfers to a real wheelchair. So I would answer then the question that yes, there are ways for VR skills to transfer to real skills. And just to finish with collaborators and funding that I've had the pleasure to work with over the years. Thank you.
Wonderful, Philippe. Perfectly on time, actually. Just great. Okay, I'm accumulating questions myself because I'm really interested in the subject as a general issue, and I'm trying to steal your secrets so that my lab can plan our next experiment. So, last but not least, again, Matthew, the stage is yours.
Do you see my slides? Yep.
Yes, that's perfect.
Hi, so my name is Matt Dyson. I'm going to talk about a study which should be called Transfer of Myo Control Skills to Prosthesis Use. I'd just like to say before I start, I'm not an engineer either. My first degree is in psychology. So this work is a collaboration between UCD, University of Edinburgh, and Newcastle University. It's been going on for quite a long time now. So the motivation for our work is that there's been this explosion in the number of multifunctional hands since around year 2000. Effectively, what happened with multifunctional hands is you had hands which could deliver a bunch of grip patterns. What didn't happen at the same time as the explosion in the engineering of these hands was equivalent work in controlling hands. So effectively, currently you could buy a modern multifunctional here like the Kobe Nexus, but the control scheme is essentially the same as an early gripper. And so the theoretical sort of goal in upper prosthesis control is that you could do something called pre-device training, which is this idea that you could teach somebody how to use a prosthetic before they get it, such that when they get a prosthesis, they can use it immediately. And the idea is that this will reduce abandonment. So some background on how we ended up doing the work that we're doing now. So a lot of this work focuses on feedback and retention. So the earlier work that we did in myocontrol, we didn't really focus on distinguishing between feedback and augmented feedback, where augmented feedback is the feedback that you receive essentially artificial, not intrinsic. And we also didn't focus on the relationship between feedback and retention. So we now know that augmented feedback does not exist in most real life scenarios. And so, for something to be retained, according to the guidance hypothesis, your augmented feedback needs to be reduced. And then we've come to the perception that retention is rarely adequately represented in upper limb prosthetics. And so conceptually, what we were looking at in this work was, if the skill isn't retained, what is it that's actually transferring between the digital domain and the real domain? And so the references at the bottom are general references for the guidance hypothesis. So what we do in our lab, and what we've been doing for a long time, is what we call abstract decoding. So it's very, very simple control scheme for prosthetics. We have a two-dimensional space, and that two-dimensional space is controlled by the two electrodes that Raoul showed earlier on. So it's very, very simple. Two electrodes around the arm, and we train people to move this cursor in two-dimensional space. The way it actually happens is they're presented with a trial on the screen. There's a cursor in the bottom. One of the four targets will be presented, and they have to move the cursor into the target. Now, the way we did this traditionally is they would have 750 milliseconds to move the cursor into the target, and then we would take a score, which was calculated over what we call the hold period. So the second 750 milliseconds, how long the person can hold the cursor in the target, and then they would be presented with a score. And so this was all kept very, very short, because the idea was that we wanted to reduce the amount of feedback people were getting, but I'm not entirely sure that that was correct. So conceptually, anyway, from a prosthetics point of view, the normal prosthesis works like this. You would output from one EMG channel to do one activation. You would output from another EMG channel whilst not doing the other one to output the second activation, and then you have a co-contraction, which allows you to shift between group patterns. What we're doing is conceptually very similar, but we differentiate the myoelectric control space into four. So you have the same EMG by itself on the edges, and then ratios of co-contractions and muscle activity, which then divide the space into four or more spaces. We currently use four. And the idea is that you can then map those four spaces to four grip patterns from a prosthesis, because we know that in real world use, the most people will actually use is about four different grasps that will be used, and the first two or three will dominate. And so what we do currently is we use four grip patterns and a state machine, which allows you to move between open grasp and between these different four. So going back to feedback, Simon Stutterford, what he did in his PhD was introduced something very, very different for us, which is a delayed feedback protocol. So it's exactly the same in that the user has to move the cursor to one of these targets. The difference is in the concurrent feedback, the user sees the cursor as it's moving. In the delayed feedback protocol, the user does not see the cursor as it moves. And what happens is, at the point where they would have been presented with a score, we start playback of the trial, which then plays back in the same real time, and then the user sees the score. So from a motor learning point of view, what they have is knowledge of performance, which is shown immediately after the trial. So Simon, we did this in a study which has been published. What we find is that this fits with motor learning literature, in that the acquisition scores for concurrent for trials with concurrent feedback are high. So these are results taken over 4 days with a 3-week washout. So these people are coming in, they're doing the task with either delayed feedback or concurrent. The delayed feedback participants get a low score. And then at the end of every day and the start of the next day, they have retention tests. So the retention tests are run, these are exactly the same trials with no feedback whatsoever. So nothing, no cursor, no score. We just get them to do the trials. So after 4 days of training, you start to get a significant difference between those people who were trained on delayed feedback and those people who are trained on concurrent, in that the people who are trained on delayed feedback retain the skill. And we see this significant difference between delayed feedback and concurrent feedback all the way up to the end of the 4 days. And then after the 3-week washout period, when the people trained on delayed feedback could continue to do the task. So the way we look at it in sort of simplistic terms is that you have the people training on concurrent will have a high score, but they will have low retention, and the people training on delayed feedback will have a lower score, but their score will be roughly the same as their training scores, their retention scores. So we ended up using this as the basis for a prosthesis transfer task. So the tasks we used in the prosthesis control on the left is box and blocks. It was a modified box and blocks. So the blocks are laid out, and the user can use any grasp, but they have to move the blocks from one side to the other. They can only score one block at a time. On the right-hand side, we had a grasp selection task. So in this case, you've got to move between 4 different objects. Each object has an associated grasp. You have to use that grasp to move the object, and it's all randomized so that people can't learn which one in between. So our the way the tasks then organized is we have our pre-condition where they do box and blocks, and then they do this grasp selection. And then people get given essentially a really cheap myoelectric control system that we built, and they take that home, or they can do training in the lab. So after 5 days, they on average do 30 blocks of around 60 trials. So what they're told to optimize during the training is their score on these delayed feedback blocks. We told them, this is what you should be focusing on. And so what you see over the 5 days is we get this gradual increase in hold score. And in comparison, at the end of the training, if we compare the EMG on the last block to the first block, the coefficient of variation is significantly lower. All that means is that the users are far more efficient in holding the cursor in one position. And then on the bottom, we have really nice relationships on every day between the hold score that the person's got and decreasing path efficiency, which is a proxy which shows you that the person is activating the 2 muscles at the same time. So in these kind of tasks, if the person's reliant on feedback, they will look at the cursor and the cursor will move around the screen, and then you will have a longer path efficiency. But if once the person isn't reliant on feedback, the cursor will move in a straight line because they're activating both muscles at the same time. And so these act at the moment as our evidence that there's some form of learning going on during the training procedure, and then people come back and do the box and blocks tasks and the grasp selection tasks. So in terms of transfer to prosthesis control, what we see in the box and blocks is we have a significant increase in the number of blocks moved. And then when we look at the grasp selection tasks, significant decrease in the amount of time taken to complete the task, and a significant decrease in the number of repetitions, that is the number of errors made as the person's moving between the different grasps. So we then looked to see, is there a relationship between our precondition and our postcondition? Is it just the case that some people are better at this kind of prosthesis tasks than others, but there's no relationship in pre and post scores, either in the number of blocks, the amount of time taken to run the task, or in the number of repetitions per trial. So what does have an influence, where we find significant relationships are on our training score, which effectively for us is a proxy for retention. So those people who have a very high training score here, like 0.9, they also have a very high decoder score, which means that these people can effectively use the prosthesis the first time they're given it after the training. So we have a significant relationship between training score and decoder score. Those who do very well on training also have significantly less errors, so there's significantly less repetitions per trial. And then, but what we don't see at the moment is a significant reduction in the overall time taken. So this is just short of significant, so it's like 0.055. It might have been significant with more participants. So our conclusions at the moment are that skills acquired during training can be transferred to prosthesis control, so virtual training. We think the retention levels and during training are what correlates with the degree of skill transfer. And we believe that the guidance hypothesis is critical to myoelectric skill and prosthesis control. And so in this context, similar to what Raoul was saying, it's the feedback conditions that are more critical than the similarity of the goals when teaching. And so I'd like to say thank you to my collaborators. So Simon Stutterford introduced the idea of delayed training. Simon and Sigrid led most of the work on guidance hypothesis, and Kia and Azapor introduced this idea of motor control-based prosthesis control for us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. That was an excellent talk, like the others. Wonderful. So, okay, so far I have no questions through the through the YouTube chat. I encourage our live audience again. But so I have written a couple notes here. And so first of all, apologies for the biggest cock up in my career. None of you is an engineer. And this is great because, yeah, it's nice to plunge into something different now and then. Most of people in the I-Corps are, so I think most of us will enjoy a lot watching this webinar again. I think we can take 10 to 15 minutes for some discussion. So if I need to sum up what I've heard today, it's first in general, XR is a great instrument. So it should be used, it should be improved, and it should be explored. Because I'm sorry, let me just stop my timer. So it should be used, improved, and explored because it's I would say relatively cheap. It doesn't involve hardware normally. And nowadays we have excellent setups. So you can buy for a few thousand euros a spectacular VR, XR, AR system, and that is portable. So you can have people do things at home. And of course, these are computers in a visual pair of glasses, which means that you can retain the data, and then you can perform all kinds of statistics. The second point is, and I go back to the title of this webinar, is it of any use? So do skills acquired in VR transfer to real life? It looks like the answer is yes. So more or less, you're all saying, well, when I do my experiments and then I test things in the real world, then I can see an improvement. And so now I'm getting back at Raoul and my nasty question for him. So I remember you were quite skeptical a few years ago because your early experiments in especially motor skill transfers were negative. So I have a question for all of you, and I will start with Raoul. So what are the parameters? What are the characteristics that we need to take into account when we design an XR environment, given the task in real life that we want? What are the parameters that make this motor skill transfer successful, in your opinion? Especially, Raoul, your last slide was very provocative. So it said, consider what should be similar to the real world. But I'm more interested in asking what should not be similar to the real world, or what can we neglect? So what is the stuff that we don't need to make similar in the VR?
Thank you, Claudio, also for this great overview. I don't think this is actually a nasty question. I think it's actually the question that we should address. I'm not sure if I can answer it yet because I have been focusing. I try to focus on what should be similar. And in preparing this talk, I was thinking actually, I expect when you said I was going to ask a question, I expected the question, yes, but in virtual reality or in XR, we can replicate daily life so well nowadays. That what is the problem that I try to raise? And but actually, I think, and that this relates to the question you actually asked, is we think that we replicate daily life very well, but actually we don't. If you think about the study of Anna, there's no movement. It's just a joystick that you sort of go over the street, which is a very different experience. So for part of the research, for part of the interest in the cognitive development, that might be very, very proper. So in that sense, for these tasks, apparently you don't have to get that deep into the motor aspect. But for instance, in the talk of the thing that Philippe showed, actually the movement that you make in these wheelchairs is very smooth. while in daily life, and there are some people that 2 doors in my office, from my office, they do a lot of, and you probably know Riemer Vechter and Luc van der Woud and these people, and we also have such treadmills, but actually in daily life it's very tiring if you constantly bump and you go, and that's a very different experience that you have. So I cannot exactly say, Claudio, yet, but I think putting that theme on the map is actually the step forward to think about. So this would be actually quite an interesting experiment also to Anna and say, well, okay, at the moment to include more accurate motor acts, would that actually have a larger effect on the cognitive benefit and so forth? So I cannot be detailed yet, but I think this is the route to go forward.
So let me refine the question and then give the stage to Philippe. Do we want to be as realistic as possible or not?
Well, do we need to be? I think, sorry, getting lost. I wanted to, anyway.
It will go down automatically at some point.
Right. I wanted to continue with what Raoul was saying, and maybe it'll answer your question in a maybe easy way, but it's very task specific in my opinion. So I don't think you can recreate anything you want in VR and XR and hope that it will transfer to real life. So you really have to I think it has to be as realistic as possible. This is probably the best bet for transfer to real life. And that is, in a way, speaking to the limitations of AR and XR. So if you have a certain task, how well can you recreate it in VR or XR will determine how much you can hope to see transfer to real life. You really have to analyze the task and see. So if you need a lot of haptic or postural sensation in the task, and well, that requires a much more expensive setup than just an HMD or a computer screen. And so probably you won't see a lot of transfers. If you're working on balance or posture or something like that, it's going to be much harder. But if you're working on visual motor skills, cognitive skills, then I think it's easier. But it's not. There's no recipe.
I'd be interested in hearing Anna's opinion on this. It seems to me that you're the only one, however, who's doing studies on cognitive skills, right? On cognitively impaired patients, as opposed to us working on motor impairment mostly.
Yes, in fact, and about that, you were saying the end of my talk that I'm looking for more realism. So, but I don't believe hyperrealism will traduce in more immersion, in more presence, and in more clinical impact. In fact, I believe presence is more psychological than a technological phenomenon. And I think factors like the relevance of the game elements for the participant, for the patient, the personalization to individual differences, motions, imagination, the abstraction capabilities of each person, which is different also, are more important for the experience, okay, for the simulation experience. So I believe we should be more, or at least I'm more worried about that, the personalization of the VR environment to the patient population we have.
So that they get more motivated to carry on the game.
And it's more relevant for them and for their daily challenges, for their daily life. Every patient has their own rehabilitation goals and different cognitive profiles, different capabilities. And I believe this is more important than hyper-realism.
We had an experience with a company was designing a VR environment for us, and So they are designers, aka artists, not engineers, although they have a lot of skills in designing that stuff, which requires you to manipulate, to master the instruments. And they created an environment which was like in a magical world. So it was not realistic, but the actions were exactly what you would do in a realistic setting, because apparently they said, well, this will motivate people to explore this world because it's not an ordinary world. It's slightly surrealistic. Raoul, what is your take here? Your microphone is muted.
Yeah, sorry. The response, thank you. The response to Anna is, I mean, I do see that this might work in this more cognitive impairments. At the same time, I'm not sure that there is this clear cut between psychological factors and motor aspects. I mean, we are embodied people, embodied minds, embodied creatures. That was the word I was looking for. So. The cognition and motor is so, and I think this is true also for your patients, and so that's why I would like to see, I would be interested in seeing the additional effect of creating more accurate motor experience, and that relates also to your question, Claudio, because if you think about the information movement coupling, and this is still, I'm still struggling with this. I would say that in a very different world, you don't have the same perception action coupling. You don't have the same information movement coupling. You make the same movements, but they are controlled in a different way, perhaps by different information. And I think that that would be a criterion that it would not transfer, at least not the motor skills. So that makes me at the same time, and that's where math comes in, which are these challenging results because you actually blow everything away and say, okay, that is just about the feedback rhythm actually that helps, and that is very interesting.
Well, this is a very nice message for the juniors who are listening to this webinar. There's so many. The beauty, in my opinion, of XR, well, there's two factors. First, like I said, it's cheap. You have no hardware, so nothing can break down unless your helmet breaks down. And the second is you can manipulate people's perception as much as you want, right? You have an endless range of possibilities. You can make them walk upside down. You can swap the direction in the world. You can change the colors. And who knows what is the best way to achieve the best motor skill transfer. Matthew, you had at some point you had an illumination, I saw.
Yeah, it was the point. So going back to like Philippe's talk, like Philippe mentioned, fading biofeedback. So when we did ours, when we did our work, so we're working in a research lab. We've got a limited amount of the logistics of running a study, basically. Mean that we just compared two different feedback conditions. But I think when you talk about what needs to be included for transfer, I think at the moment there's a huge opportunity for applying machine learning to these areas, but in the context of actually trying to work out how to fade feedback, in the sense that there's as long as you can test retention in the short term, you should be able to dynamically change the feedback that somebody's experiencing, and then gradually reduce the feedback such that you can personalize a motor learning training experience to each person. I don't have a Siegfried and Simon have a far better understanding of the literature than I do, but when you go back to the original literature on this kind of stuff, you can see where there's gaps, where work progressed and then stopped, basically because the logistics of doing personalized faded biofeedback when this was a very prominent field, just it wasn't something you could do. It's equally the same with representation of performance. That work, there's lots of information on feeding back knowledge of scores and everything, but very little of feeding back knowledge of actual movements, because this wasn't something that could be done with the technology at the time. Whereas XR basically means that you can do all of this, and it's all suddenly out in the open and stuff for new people to be working on.
Okay, that's a very interesting bit. This is 3:15 now, so yes, please.
Well, Wouldn't you say, Matthew, I like, and in particular, I like always if people go back to the original papers, and the Schmidt work in the early and late 80s is fabulous. But isn't there, and if you think the push that you make from that first study and pushing more feedback is, and that's also where Anna comes in with the sort of cognitive limitations. So where is the limitation? I mean, how much can you process? How much can you still use? And that's what I like. I'm not a cognitive psychologist, and that's what I like about this movement approach. If the more you can get it into a task, you don't overload your cognitive system, and you make it very ecological valid, as Anna also pushed. And I think that's what Philippe also tried to do in his study. So Matthew, can you comment on that?
Well, so my personal opinion is that I know that so other people have tried looking at transfer in prosthetics with pattern recognition systems, say for example. So in a pattern recognition system, you can feed back knowledge of score. You can't feed back necessarily knowledge of performance because it's a multi-dimensional input to a classifier, and then that classifier just gives you, however many outputs. It can't tell you really how. It can't tell you anything about the quality of the action that you performed. Whereas in our domain, where we're moving this cursor around, it's a very low dimensional domain, so it's very easy to show knowledge of performance. I don't think that will scale up to pattern recognition systems. I know that people have these,
Spider plots.
Yeah, spike plots. I think in theory you could do a spike plot but you would have to remove all of the features which weren't contributing to the spike plot, such that the user could manipulate the same thing as the classifier. So I think that I don't view any of these things as contradictory. I personally think we were lucky in the domain that we had. We were very lucky in the delayed feedback. That wasn't found. That was found effectively by almost by accident. And but we could immediately see the consequences. And so this works for what we do. I don't think it negates the idea of higher dimensional feedback for actually training activities of daily living. What we're training is somebody how to access the grasps. What you need after that is how to actually then use those grasps in the real environment. I think they're very different things.
Yeah, right. I agree with that too.
Me too.
So this is 3:15. We're almost out of time. I'd like to drop a last question for all of you. And I'll start with this. There's some controversy in prosthetics about the usage of VR to treat phantom limb pain. And especially one of the problems there is, how do you build a control group? So how do you check that your VR treatment is as effective as or more effective than the standard therapy? Now, the question seems to be to have a reason in all your talks. How do you figure out what your control groups do as opposed to what the experimental groups do? And I'd like to have first your opinion here.
Well, I'm not very familiar with prosthetics.
No, in general, in your field, I mean, not in prosthetics.
How can we say that our VR treatment is better than a control group?
In general, how do you design the control group against the VR group?
In our case, we use standard cognitive rehabilitation tasks.
Okay.
Of course, it has limitations because in a sheet we can have lots of distractors and targets, like simulating the Toulouse-Pierron task, another cancellation, the Bell's test, etc. But in VR, we have a limited number of elements we can have in the screen, and this makes the comparison different. But the best we can do is having the paper and pencil. So also trying to, in our case, to design the RIA-CT, we performed a participatory design study with rehabilitation professionals that rated the tasks in terms of cognitive demands for executive function, memory, language. So we used these 20 professionals' ratings to build models to personalize the tasks. Okay, I have to be more difficult for attention. I have to add 10 more distractors, 5 targets, and so on. So, and these models were applied for the paper and pencil instrument, the task generator, and the RIA City. So this was the fairest comparison we were able to do.
All right.
Try to be the most equivalent.
I was giving the stage to Philippe, actually. Yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Well, it really depends on what you want to test. So I understand in rehabilitation or in health, it's difficult to have a control group where they do nothing, where you don't, I mean, ethically, where you don't provide them with any treatment or intervention.
Without them knowing, by the way, that's the point. When you have a real
Yeah,
RCT,
without
you get
them knowing
placebo
is
or
almost
the drug.
impossible. We're
Yeah,
not in the,
exactly.
if it's not a medication, so you can, well, so the patients cannot be blinded, or that's
Yeah,
that's almost impossible, but that's the reality. But you can either give them another like conventional rehabilitation, or another method is to put them on a waiting list. So if you want to compare with nothing, you can have your controlled group on a waiting
Okay,
list.
right.
So, and then after they wait for an equivalent amount of time, and you provide them with treatment afterwards. So
It
you
sounds
can
like
do.
a sort of a SCED, right? Like single case experimental design. So you compare different people in different stages of.
It's not single, it's called a step wedge design. If you're so where
Hmm.
you have the people start at the
All right.
treatment at different times.
All
And
right.
yeah.
That's a really good idea. Raoul, you are familiar with that, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's one way to do it. One can also actually, and that's how we did it, an experiment also with healthy of non-disabled, is but you can also test different VR conditions. So everybody
Okay,
gets
right. Yeah.
some kind of training, but you leave out some information there and other information there, and you sort. I mean, it's yeah, it's you have to do something to the control group
Okay.
or to the alternative group. But this is a way to graduate
Yeah.
to test different ideas. Actually, in the ideal case, you would have different hypotheses of one works where does this work versus that work, and then you basically both your groups are receive some training that does make sense.
Last but not least, once again, Matt, what is your take?
So when we compare feedback conditions, then we have control groups, and we basically they come in and they do a similar task which matches the performance and everything. But when we haven't had control groups yet for transfer tasks. So we've seen 2 successful examples of prosthesis transfer, but we've never really worked out what you could reasonably do as a control task. And one of the issues that would be, I mean, from my personal perspective, is that if you found a task which you gave somebody a myoelectric task which enabled them to use a prosthesis a week later, that wasn't actually somehow related to training to use a prosthesis, it would be very difficult to publish it, because that would be the kind of thing that the
Right.
university would be immediately, this is patentable, this is basically game changing. Because if there was a task which allowed somebody to do this, then yeah, it would be completely different, completely different area. It would be nothing to do with anything I understand about myoelectric control.
Right. I agree with that. And with this, I believe we're almost out of time. So I'd like to thank heartily our 4 distinguished speakers for today. And I encourage our audience to follow us on LinkedIn, on the YouTube, and on our website. And see you for the next number 9 webinar that will happen in about 2 months. And we don't yet know what it will be about, so stay tuned. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot for the discussion. Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.